bienvenidos, welcome. Today we're going to be diving into the rich and flavorful world of barbacoa. If you're a fan of tender, slow-cooked meats, you're gonna like this one. So first of all, what is barbacoa? Barbacoa is a method of cooking meat that originated in the Caribbean and later became very popular in Mexico. It's typically made with beef, but you could also find versions of it made with lamb or made with goat. The key to barbacoa is slow cooking meat until it's incredibly tender and very flavorful. Now that you have an idea of what barbacoa is, let's get to it.
For this recipe, we will be using about 10 dried pasilla chilies, 1 tablespoon of white vinegar or apple cider vinegar, 1 whole lime, about a tablespoon of fresh ginger, 2 bay leaves, 6 cloves of garlic, about 1.5 tablespoons of salt, about a tablespoon of dry Mexican oregano, and last but not least, about 4 to 5 pounds of beef chuck, whatever fits in your crock pot.
Let's begin by preparing the meat. We are going to start by fabricating the beef chuck into smaller yet large pieces, which should be about baseball size. I am going to be removing a good amount of fat, but it's totally fine to leave a little bit in there in order to have a good fatty flavor in our dish. We just don't want too much fatty flavor in it because it's going to take away from the main flavor that we're trying to aim for. Some of the fat that is attached to the silver skin is usually terrible, and which is nice to do rather than having to use the knife on everything. Remember, we are trying to get rid of a good amount of fat, but we're not going to spend so much time trying to remove every single piece of fat that you see on the meat. Like I said, we are trying to keep the pieces about baseball size in hand. The big pieces are ideal since we are going to be slow cooking the meat, and any smaller pieces would overcook and dissolve, which would mess up the consistency of the meats. If you do find a bit of skin left on the meat, then we could remove it because we will not be needing it. Once we are finished fabricating the beef, we're going to start salting the beef and putting it onto a separate plate. We are going to cover the meat after salting it and refrigerate it for at least 1 hour. This step could also be done a day in advance. Moving on to the marinade. We're going to start by cleaning them off. You could run them under running water or wipe the dust off each chile with a damp paper towel. We're also going to remove the stem and the seeds from the chilies. If you feel like you want a little more spice in your barbacoa, make sure to leave some with seeds. In a medium pot, we're going to bring some water to boil, and then we're going to put the chiles in there in order to rehydrate them. It should only take about 8 to 10 minutes for them to become very soft. After the chiles have softened, we're going to remove them from the heat. Now we can start removing the chiles from the liquid, but do not dump the liquid. We are going to reserve it for later. In the mixture, we're going to start by putting the garlic cloves, the oregano, the salt, and the pasilla peppers.
We're also going to be adding the ginger and the juice of a whole lime. As we begin to blend the chili, we are going to add a bit of the chili liquid that we reserved earlier. That way the paste would be a little thinner and not too thick.
Once you're done, the chile puree should have a consistency of barbecue sauce. Make sure to taste it for salt. It should be on the salty side and no single flavor should stand out. Now let's pull out our crock pots. Let's admire the beauty of the marbling on this meat. Let's begin by coating the meat with the puree. A bit of puree on each piece is pretty good to assure us that everything will be indulged in flavor. Just remember, it does not have to be perfect. If you don't cover the whole thing, it's totally fine. Once we got it all in there, we could start by pouring any leftover sauce over it. We can begin to add the vinegar over it and the bay leaves as well. Move it around a little bit in order to incorporate all of the stuff on top into the gaps of the meat. Pour whatever you have left of the chile liquid on top and you can move it around again. Let's place the lid and cook it in low heat for about 10 hours. As we wait, let's make sure to clean as you go, get your dishes washed, and leave your counter spotless.
Since we're letting the barbacoa cook overnight and we still have plenty of time on our hands, let's make a green salsa with tomatillos. For our salsa, we're going to need about 4 to 6 tomatillos depending on the size, about 2 to 3 serrano peppers depending how spicy you want it, a quarter of an onion, and 2 to 3 garlics depending on the size, and a handful of cilantro. Like any other dish that includes bread and veggies, I'm going to start by washing the tomatillos, the cilantro, and also the serranos.
In a pan or cast iron, we will put aluminum foil on top and make sure it's a bit wrinkly in order to hold our serranos and tomatillos in place. Once it's hot, we could start by placing our tomatillos and serranos into the cast iron and start charring them. Every few minutes and so, we could start flipping them and turning them around just so they can cook evenly. If it's too hot, you could also use tongs to move them around. You could also move the foil around if you need more surface for them to stay on. I prefer to char them because it helps get a good toasty flavor into the salsa. The color should start changing into a more yellow greenish color. Once it's fully changed, you could start by pulling them out. In a blender, we're going to start by adding our tomatillos, our serrano, our onion, our cilantro, and our garlic. We're also going to add a tad bit of water, not much, but just enough for it to blend, a bit of salt, and I like to add a bit of caldo de pollo in there. We don't want to overblend and make it into soup, so make sure we're only clicking it little by little for it to blend nicely. Don't forget a taste test for salt.
barbacoa cooking, and we also have the salsa in the fridge. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bonus recipe, let's make some Jamaica.
For every quart of water, you will be using about a cup of hibiscus petals, which is also known as Jamaica petals. Make sure to rinse the flower petals in order to remove any dirt in case there is any on it. Once the water starts to boil, you can add your hibiscus into the water, and we will let it simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes. We'll also make sure to stir it every once in a while. When it's almost done, you could start adding some sweetener now, and you could adjust it later on. Let's remove it from the heat and let it cool down. Once it's cooled down, let's start straining it. Note that you could also save and reuse the flowers in order to make Jamaica another day. They could be reused for about 2 to 3 times depending how strong the flower is the first time. I also like to squeeze all I can from the hibiscus in order to get the most amount of juice possible. Make sure you are also trying the Jamaica in order to know if it needs a little bit more water or if it's going to need a little more sugar or maybe ice if you want it to cool down a little more. The foam is going to set after a while, so removing it is optional. Keep going until it's the way you like it.
Let's start by prepping the final garnish. That includes some onion, lemon, rábanos or radish, and cilantro.
This will all just be garnished for the barbacoa, which I will be serving it as tacos. Barbacoa is very versatile, and you could use it in a variety of dishes such as on its own, as tacos, burritos, quesadillas, or even on top of salads. We now have our small diced onion, our quartered lime, sliced radish, and chopped coriander. Now we could start by setting the table. Once our griddle is hot, we could start heating up tortillas. Once we remove the tortillas from the griddle, we can start building our tacos, doing the tortilla, adding some barbacoa, and then finishing it off with some garnish. And let's not forget our house-made green salsa. This is it, guys, the final result. Doesn't this look amazing? Tell me, are you hungry yet?
The salsa really gives a perfect kick to it. And the Jamaica, just perfect. Thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Until next time, hasta luego.